Continuous improvement. So this is one, where we've talked now about find your big bottlenecks, find your constraints, and look external to your market, to your strategies, and that's your number one, opportunity there is to alleviate any bottlenecks there. But this is really about now looking at a lot of these smaller details within your company, and every company is made up, just like every project, there's thousands of installation tasks that all come together on a project. And there's kind of a standard for doing those installation tasks. The first standard is the standard estimating units that we're using to estimate the job with, wherever we got those from, but that's the beginning of the standard, is like we're really hoping that we're going to be able to go out there and install the things out in the field for this amount. And that goes the same now, as you move into any of the office management side of, processing an RFI or a submittal or whatever it is. And so it does all start with your standards, and your standards are going to be probably in the form of a production metric, a quality level of what you're expecting for an outcome, and then some sort of a procedural how to go do it. I think we talked in, I don't know, one of the prior, probably in the contractor business model, that standards do evolve over time, right? I mean, all standards start with like a person that has experience kind of going thumbs up, thumbs down. That is your first standard. There's nothing wrong with that. There's only something wrong with that if that same exact process now is being done by a half dozen people, and there's still a person that's thumbs up, thumbs down, and we haven't codified it. But I don't want to digress into the standards piece, but the continuous improvement piece is looking at, okay, you've got that standard, you plan to do the work to the standard, you now do the work to the standard, you follow up and you kind of check against that standard, and then you act upon any improvements. And sometimes those are little small improvements to the standard, sometimes they're little small improvements to the execution, sometimes they're both, sometimes it's just a great, like, okay, cool, we're doing that the right way. And that's the quality control and quality assurance. Quality control is ensuring we're delivering the right outcomes for the process, whatever we set that standard to, and quality assurance is saying we are doing this in a consistent way throughout the organization. It's kind of the one best way to do it. And you kind of run those PDCA cycles over and over. Everything does come down to cycles, whether it's physical or mental or whatever it is. It's deliberate practice in doing it, and then at some point, you kind of climb up the mountain a little bit and you set a new standard in place. And you're like, okay, cool, here's a new standard, new best practices, and we're going to disseminate that across the organization. That in itself gets harder and harder as you scale. It's really easy, when you're small, you both have very little need for standards. So it's a lot of thumbs up, thumbs down. The few standards that you do put in place, you can just you can email out the standards to the two other people that have email addresses, right? It's not that big of a deal. You print the sheet or the checklist, you take it out to the job site, and it's really, it's fairly easy. Like, I can't even imagine what a standard looked like at Kiewit. So like, I just, can't even begin to imagine how you disseminate that across 45,000 employees worldwide. So, but that, anyways, how you disseminate, I don't want to go a whole lot further into it here because there's a lot to unpack here. But I guess any stories, any insights on this part?
Well, probably the insight, just saying, how do you disseminate that to 45,000 people? Really, it's about the repetitive nature, just like here, right? It's a cycle. It's about the repetitive nature of utilizing that standard, implementing a checklist to go with that standard, so that every single time you run it, every person that's involved, if there's a change, it goes back to, it runs up the chain, it gets modified, it comes back down. So very clear communication. But it really is about making sure that you're using and working toward that standard every single time. We would have divisions in different parts of the country that would come together to do a joint bid review. And they may have thought of the process on how to build the work differently, but how they reviewed an estimate was exactly the same, because everybody just used the same standard, the same checklist to that standard. And that's how you keep it going, and that's how you continuously improve it. It's just over and over and over again, and pretty soon everybody knows where to find it. So
yeah, that's I think as we get into the next piece on how we, what do we do once we're kind of checking it and the outcomes are unexpected outcomes. Unexpected can be either really, really good or really, really bad, kind of out of range, or, whatever that looks like. This is where I also love your, how you demonstrated scaling up of the, what you call the root cause analysis process, which kind of comes down to a few questions, right? When something happens that's outside, let's say I expected a production rate of 100 per day or something, and now I look back at the week and my production rate ended up being 100, 70 per day on average. I've kind of got to go back there and look at it and start to say, there's kind of a what, how, and why, series of questions, and there's a lot of details beyond this in terms of the questions, but the basics are just like what happened. Usually, the timeline of events, who were the people involved, and this is not looking for blaming a person. It's just saying who was there, who was involved, what were the tasks, what were the tools, what were the decisions that were made, what were the relevant conditions, and so that's. To me, you start with the timeline, here's our unexpected outcome demarcation point. We might have played that forward from there, so we might be here. The issue may or may not be resolved yet. But either way, let's take the timeline back to the earliest tangible event or decision that was reasonably connected. And start really, laying those things out. And a lot of times, just in doing that timeline process, it's really interesting. One, we find it really hard to get people to go through that in the right level of detail and actually look things up. But now you have text messages, you have, there's hardly anything that isn't on a text message, a phone log, in your email, in your calendar, or in the project management software. There's very few things literally that didn't happen. Oh, and by the way, you can go back to the job site camera, if it's there, right? There's so much information, and just by going through there and really identifying what happened and pulling it all the way back, usually the problem becomes really, really obvious. Like one of them, we had a quality control problem where we had a bunch of an excessive amount of broken panels on a utility scale solar project. And when we start, and it's really easy to go through there and say, oh, well, you just got to take it, you can tell that it's people that are almost trying to manage at the wrong level when they're just like, you got to have accountability. If you're the superintendent, you got to take accountability. You got to do this. They're using all the extreme ownership words. I love Jocko, but you realize like he wrote extreme ownership, like unpack that a little bit. He was in the military. They have standards for all these things. They have this process already in place. So yes, you have to take ownership for following those standards. When we actually tracked it back, once we got past the emotion, and that took a while, when we tracked it back, it was because there was one small change made in the procedures, and it was to level workflow, and we reallocated the task from this crew to this crew, but we only told one crew. so literally it just fell down. I think we told, and there were several crews doing these two different tasks, and so we just didn't tell all the crews exactly what the change was, that we reallocated this task from this to this, and so therefore they had a mess up on it, and that was it. There was nothing else that went wrong. There's no reason to keep going at that point. We had the problem. Okay, cool. We know what we had to do to go fix it and everything like that. But we also know that what went wrong, and we just didn't disseminate the change in the standards very much, and we were just trying to level out workload between crews. And it was just a failure. Both crews had very clear work plans on what they were supposed to do. We literally moved a bullet point from one to the other to level workflow, and we forgot to tell somebody. And it created all this problem. The bigger problem organization was created all kinds of emotion in between, because we ran down this whole accountability and project manager accountability and superintendent accountability and it was like, no, we were actually just kind of sloppy with our procedures, and so you could say that, yes, that's an accountability thing, but no, we just weren't there age and stage of the company to do that. So anyways, that's kind of the timeline. That's the what, the how, is the procedures, the training, the available information. And in this case, once we actually tracked it down to the procedures, that's exactly what it was. And it was one of those, moments, why? And there's usually multiple causes. Like when somebody says root cause, for very simple things, there's usually a single root cause. Usually it's root causes. So in this case, there was that one thing that bullet point was transferred, but we really didn't have any clear standards on how we rolled out a process or a process change or anything like that to make sure that things don't fall through the cracks. So, yeah, that's fixed, and they're completely moving forward now, in a completely different way. It's an expensive lesson, but not that expensive in the grand scheme of things. So this, Sue, is something, though. This is root cause analysis, and every superintendent, project engineer, project manager at Kiewit that I've ever worked with knows how to do this not from a conceptual standpoint, but you guys had a tool for how you did root cause analysis.
Yeah,
Am I
no,
mistaken
you
on
are
that? Yeah.
exactly
Okay.
right.
So
Yeah,
walk us
you
through
are
that.
exactly right. And it was the same types of questions in the same type of form that we used for everything. It was for and we looked at continuous improvement as, hey, we had a near miss on safety. What happened? How did it happen? Why did it happen? Right? That's where everybody really could hone in when it was based off safety, right? When people started to see that. You mentioned QA/QC, right? When you start to see your dollars go up in rework, then it's a matter of, hey, what are we going to do here? And yeah, it was very much a kind of a fishbone type of root cause analysis, where just picking apart each and every one of the pieces to see, ultimately, why did it happen, and now what do we have to do for it not to happen again. The big leap was when most people could finally move this from, oh my gosh, it happened, now what do we do and how do we fix it, to using these questions for continuous improvement to improve already good operations, right? Because now, yeah, it's a root cause,
Right.
but how could we make it even better, right? If we were assuming this wasn't as good as it could be,
Yeah.
now how can you turn that and make it even more profitable for what we're working on? So seeing the bigger picture.
You mean the excavator didn't end up buried in a mud pit? It ended up achieving 40% more production rate than we had in the estimate, and it's doing that consistently. So yeah, that's an unexpected outcome, and we should absolutely do
Yeah.
a timeline on that and root cause on that, so that we can share those best practices where applicable across the organization,
Yeah.
including estimating.
Well, and that's
So
one of the
yeah,
things that we used to do as well, right? The whole what happened, events, people, tasks, all of that, keeping track of all of that, and then how did it happen? A lot of times, we had people out there doing time studies as work was happening to see this is how it happened, and then looking at how could we make it better. The why did it happen? Why did it happen this way? Well, if we reversed the scraper spread to go in a different direction because the where we had to put the spoils has changed, we could increase it by this much. But we had people there documenting the how over and over and over again, so that we could go back to the why and keep changing that to, you know why did it get better, or why is it going to get better. So
and interestingly, that doing those time studies builds talent. Like so much of what we're talking about here, the act of doing these things builds your team. So there's some of your team members that this just aligns. It aligns all of them, or works to align all of them. But for your people that are high trajectory, going to be moving up into management roles, and there's going to be a few of those in any given team. Going through these things over and over develops the skills, so that that time study that your field engineers are sitting out there doing today, by the time they're area leaders, they're going to be able to go through there and see those things and come to that
right,
conclusion in seconds. They don't
that's
need to
right.
see the full movie. Yeah, and that's how you build a team and a talent pipeline. So now we get into improvement category changes. And so there's probably three broad categories, and it's really important to know which one they are, where they fall, and then we're going to get into the some of the personality traits that are better for handling different types of these improvement categories, and give some examples of that. And so the first one is like immediate countermeasures, right? The building's on fire. We need to handle this quickly, and we need to keep operations moving forward. That example of broken equipment on the project that we needed to install to finalize the equipment, we didn't stop and go like, okay, let's go figure out what happened. I mean, you could see what happened, you could quantify what happened, and you immediately had to go. There was no question about reordering, the equipment that needed to be installed and getting that moving forward. So that's happening in parallel. Those are those immediate countermeasures that need to happen. They're urgent and important. There's small continuous improvements. Those should become regular daily habits. We'll talk through how to make those regular daily habits. We should always be trying to get just a little bit better, a little bit faster each time. And there's a lot of talent development that goes into learning how to see that. Like, so you just said time studies, being able to go out there and just observe the work and see those little details and everything. That's huge. I think, I talked about it before. One of the earliest things that I remember of like really clicking with how important those time studies were was reading something in Keyways magazine, probably in 96, 97. And it was about increasing the yield, and it was like by a half a yard per load on, by using some spray on the bed liner and stuff of the haul trucks and everything. But in the article, it had the project engineer or the field engineer that identified it. It had all the math and all the calculations. I just remember reading that. It was a really simple article, and you're going, okay, that's pretty cool, but a half a yard at a time when you're doing thousands of them adds up really, really quickly. So small continuous improvements always have to happen. And then there's larger resource commitments. Like if you decide that you're going to make a huge bet on 3D printed, buildings or something like that, that's a large resource commitment. That is not an incremental improvement. That is a CEO board level decision that we're going to go commit resources to go into something like that, because it's going to be millions of dollars and it's going to take years. It could pay off huge. It could not, for a whole variety of reasons. So it's like those three categories. And then where I think it's important is where you map those out, and a lot of people have seen this. I think they've called it the Eisenhower matrix before. I think that he was the first person to use it. And Stephen Covey, most people reference it from Stephen Covey of the 7 Habits of, these 4 quadrants of going. You got a matrix, an axis of urgency, an axis of importance, and things that are high urgency and high importance. You have to manage them. Those are crises. Those are pressing problems. Things that are low urgency but high importance, that's what you really have to prioritize, because they're your strategic priorities. They're your new opportunities. They're your planning and execution of the project. They're committing the time and aligning the team. And then there's things that are really low on both sides. I'm guilty of that. I watched my share of YouTube shorts last night and everything because I was tired at the end of a long week. Yeah, it's total time wasting activity. I'm super clear on it. So I have no delusions that I was being productive last night. But it was after a long week and all that. And then you have ones that are lower importance and also lower urgency. And honestly, you should try and minimize them. Say, can we get by without actually doing this task at all? Can I delegate it? What does that look like? So that's kind of the prioritization metrics. 7 Habits of Highly Effective, great book. And here's where everything lays out. Countermeasures, that is high, right? We hit a water line. There's water flooding the parking lot, flooding the road. Yep, that's a right now problem. There is continuous improvement. Really important to know those are somewhere between managing them but also minimizing them. Some continuous improvements like literally just should not be done because it's just a waste of time. So unless there's a compelling reason for somebody to learning and development thing, a lot of continuous improvements, there's an excitement to change just for the sake of change because human bias, we like new things. A lot of us are both afraid of new things and like new things all at the same time. So we're just messed up. Just know it's the wet wiring. This is why Sue got the psychology degree. Call her. Don't call me. And then there's the major resource commitments, and those really need to be prioritized. And unfortunately, for a growing contractor, especially in our current environment where we have these major talent shortages on the front end coming into the trades, and we also have the people leaving the industry just by retirement. At the experience level, the people that are still there that should be focused on those high level, high or low urgency, high importance type of big major resource commitments and decisions, they're just not truly spending the appropriate time. I see this is where you'd say, like some of the value we add is what, pulling their heads up off their desk for a few minutes, and this is not in a bad way. This is just, I mean, you're in the fight. So, yeah, how do you help people get there into that corner?
Yeah, and this gets to, just like David and I laugh about this all the time. Sometimes you do have to just grab somebody by the back of their neck, have them lift their head up off the desk and see beyond, their head looking down, right? I know cultures that are trying to fix the texting issue by, people with their heads down texting by putting stoplights in the sidewalk so people can see them. But all they're doing is, one, they're probably keeping people safe, but two, they're perpetuating that act of continually looking into that one, area. So sometimes you have to help somebody either put their phone down or put their stuff down and just get them to sit back and see the bigger picture. Some people can get there faster than others. Others are more, again, in those immediate countermeasures. Others are more strategic in their thought. And there's, you have to bring people along at the speed at which they can come along, no matter what we do. Anytime, David and I go into contractors to help them, we can only move at the speed at which the team can move at. And that is where we help to, again, get their heads to see slightly wider or slightly up a little bit higher as to what that next step is. So if there were a magic bullet, we'd be using it, but there's not any one, that's for sure.
Yeah, and it's funny as it sounds like, and this is just from my own experience as a contractor, there are certain things like we would prepare very heavily, for attorneys or litigation or something like that, because you're paying so much money for all of that, that whole cast of characters to go be there. The preparation burden's really high. In some cases, that is our key value add, is just quite simply that we're scheduled, we're going to be there, and so everybody really stops and pauses to go focus on that. And that is just they're on the business day, right? And that's 1 out of 20 days a month. That's pretty good. And that's really, it's really, really hard to go do. It truly is hard to go do. So, I mean, that's not casting stones. That's just, a lot of our design of how our engagements work came down to, like, how we operated as contractors. Because you spend a lot of time in that quadrant that's managing. And, it's not always fighting fires, but there is still a lot of even just low level stuff that you have to do, not super important, but just stuff routine stuff you have to do in that management quadrant, especially, with the changing workforce dynamics. You're training people. There's an increased burden of quality control, quality assurance for managers. So the thing that does get pushed all the way out is that, those bigger, longer term decisions and everything. And those bigger, longer term decisions around people, around strategy, around systems. So that's just kind of how to look at that, and an overlay with that chart.